You will be familiar with this issue because on February 17th, this body passed in a unanimous bipartisan fashion by a vote of 49-0 Senate File 209, which would have dealt with that problem. The message today is, and as you know, Senate File 209 has been in conference committee and the conferees have been unable to agree. The message today is that the state of Iowa has the money. We owe the money. We have asked people to do work for the state of Iowa, and it is only right for the state of Iowa to pay its bills. We need to pay our bills as a state. We don't want to become a state that doesn't pay its bills. Now, if we don't pass this and get this through the House soon, there are going to be some consequences. Number one is there's going to be hardship to not only the people who have done the work that we've asked them to do and have already submitted their claims to the state. There's going to be hardship for the rest of the people in those businesses and the employees. Second, we run the risk that people will be unwilling to take this work in the future, jeopardizing the constitutional rights not of criminals, but of the accused, which is people who are both innocent and guilty. A third practical problem is if we don't get these bills paid soon, statutorily, we're going to begin to owe 1% per month in interest. So, Mr. President, those are my opening comments. I believe there's discussion.
The chair recognizes the senator from Story, Senator Quirmbach.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I share Senator Hogg's concern that we move forward on this matter. I think it is vital to state interests. You know, it's sometimes overlooked the fact that lawyers are also business people. And a lot of law firms are, in fact, small businesses. They have their bills that have to be paid. They have to pay secretaries. They have to pay for supplies. They have to pay rent on office space and so forth. Our failure to provide reimbursement on a timely basis jeopardizes those small businesses and in some cases may cause these businesses to fail. Not every lawyer is rich. Not every lawyer wears $1,000 suits. Some are struggling, and some take these types of clients partly to pay their own bills, but partly out of a sense of duty. But at some point, small business people have to look at their clients, and if they have a deadbeat client, they have to question whether they're going to continue to provide the services to that deadbeat client. I certainly don't want the state of Iowa to become a deadbeat client. There are also other concerns with regard to public safety here. If attorneys at some point in time decide not to take indigent clients, then we begin to run into several constitutional problems. There is a constitutional requirement that an individual be provided with an adequate, competent defense. If attorneys are not available and not willing to take these cases, then trials cannot move forward. Ultimately, that causes another constitutional problem, namely the constitutional requirement that an individual has a right to a speedy trial. If that is denied, then an individual may have to be released, even though the charges against them are valid, even though the evidence is available. If there is not a speedy trial because there is not competent defense counsel available, that individual might have to be set free. At some point in time, Gideon's trumpet will blow, and that will be a day that we will all regret. Please support this bill. We do not want the state to become a deadbeat client. We do not want people let loose who should be brought to justice. Thank you, Mr. President.
The chair recognizes the senator from Washington, Senator Griner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I don't speak very often, but I have some questions, and I was wondering if Senator Hogg would yield.
Senator, yield.
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Senator, as I recall, this item appeared in House File 45 that we addressed earlier in the session. Is that correct?
I can't remember that, Senator Greiner, but I think you might be right.
Well, my question is I'm struggling to understand why it was removed from House File 45, and I was hoping you could enlighten me, or if you can't, could you indicate who of your colleagues I should ask that question?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll give it my best shot, and if I'm not right, I'm sure somebody will correct me. My recollection is that when House File 45 came to us, we thought it was a better approach to take the supplemental appropriations out of that bill and deal with them in a separate bill. And so that's what then led us to do Senate File 209, which was sort of mid-year budget corrections that included both supplemental appropriations and the coupling with the 2010 tax changes, because we thought it was better to have a single bill that dealt with mid-year budget corrections. That's my recollection.
All right. Well, it just seems to me that if there had been a will to get these young people, and my apologies if there are more mature people handling these types of cases, but in the emails I've received, it's primarily been young people who are just getting their practices started that are primarily doing this work. So I apologize if there's some middle-aged guy that's doing it, or maybe congratulating because I'm throwing him into the pool with the young people. But it seems to me that if we were really interested in getting our accounts in order, we would have addressed this in House File 45. So although I appreciate the explanation you gave me, there's this nagging thing in the back of my head that says there has to be more to it than that. Senator Quirmbach mentioned that we're deadbeats. We were deadbeats then, Senator, and so this isn't, being deadbeats isn't something that's new today. The real unfortunate thing is that that account was not fully funded last year in the budget appropriation. Had that been fully funded, we wouldn't be here today having that discussion. Thank you, Senator Hogg.
The chair recognizes the senator from Butler, Senator Dix.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the reason I rise this afternoon is to ask the members to oppose this. And really, you know, the point that I want to make is that everyone here believes that this is a bill that should be paid. We do have an obligation to pay this bill. But it's the irresponsible choices that were made in the previous legislature that is why we are here right now. This is an additional appropriations to the 2011 budget year that ends this coming July. And a choice was made last year, even though the estimate was brought before this chamber of how much money it was going to cost. A pretty spot-on estimate, by the way. And yet the legislature chose to underfund that by 50%. By doing this bill today, all we are doing is skirting the intention of the 99% expenditure limitation law and adding money that wasn't available last year under the 99% expenditure law. So anybody who believes that you're maintaining the spirit of that law by voting for this, you're sadly mistaken. You are contributing to the irresponsible spending policies of the past, and at the same time not recognizing that these are dollars that could be used for other priorities. I've heard members stand up on the floor of this Senate day after day and believe that we need to spend more money for education, more money for health care for the poor, you name it, a lot of good and worthy projects for the people of Iowa, and yet we can't control our spending. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to recognize that the 99% budget expenditure limitation was put in place for a reason. And by doing supplementals like this, we're not helping to put the state back on sound financial footing. Thank you, Mr. President.
The chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Hatch.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Dix yield, please?
Senator yield.
I will.
Senator Dix, what's the projected ending balance that the Revenue Estimating Committee established in December?
I believe it's about $370 million.
$370 million? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Senator Dix. Ladies and gentlemen, the appropriations last year was not an overstepping of last year's legislature, which Senator Dix is implying because it was a Democratic legislature with a Democratic governor. To maintain the integrity of the 99% budgeting process, excuse me, and it also provided, I don't need to be that loud, Mr. President. It also provided a process in which the continuing year, if a budget is insufficient and we have an ending balance that we acknowledge exists or even is growing, it is incumbent upon this legislature to fund those priorities. I was the floor manager of that bill back in 1992. I understand exactly the intent of the legislature, and we have lived up to it. We budgeted a 99% of an amount that was agreed to at a specific time. Now we are 9 months into that year. We have $370 million, and we have services in our state that not only are underfunded, but the very freedoms that Americans have defined in the Constitution are going unserved because the state doesn't have enough money to pay the Indigent Defense Fund. The most patriotic thing we could do is to live up to our obligations and to make sure that every citizen of this state receives their constitutional rights. And denying an appropriation, in the terms of some of my colleagues, would be just unpatriotic. Thank you, Mr. President.
The chair recognizes the senator from Story, Senator Quirmbach.
Thank you, Mr. President. I apologize for rising a second time, but I just wanted to remind Senator Dix, as far as respecting the 99% limit last year, we did a heck of a lot better than that. We appropriated $92 million less than the 99% limit. We only appropriated about 97.5% of forecast revenues. It was a very difficult budget last year. We pushed every department in the state government to economize, to save, to find savings, to find efficiencies, to encourage some of their employees to take early retirement. We made a lot of tough decisions last year. In some areas, we may have set our goals a little bit too high. We knew that we might not be able to achieve every target, but in that circumstance, it was hard to identify any area that could be forgiven the obligation to try to save and conserve on funding. Now, doing a supplemental appropriation is hardly a novel idea. It is hardly a new thing. We do supplemental appropriations every year. There are certain areas that are, in effect, entitlements. Medicaid is one of them. All right? We never know exactly how much Medicaid expenditure we're going to have in a given year because it depends on how many people come through the door and how many people turn out to be eligible. The same thing is true about indigent defense. We can never be sure in advance how many people are going to need these services. The one thing that we can be sure of is that we have a constitutional obligation to provide them. So I want to thank Governor Branstad for urging us to move forward on this. I think that the governor has taken a responsible position here. We've got to pay our bills. We've got to meet our constitutional obligations. The downside risk is too great. The senator before who said, well, we were a deadbeat back in February, well, you're suggesting what? That we should be an even deader beat now? That makes no sense. The bill that contained this appropriation, that I think we correctly packaged this appropriation into, with the coupling of the tax code and other mid-year corrections, that bill passed unanimously. So anyone who wants to criticize this bill, and anybody who wants to vote against this bill, you may find yourself subject to the criticism that you were for it before you were against it. Please take that into consideration before you cast your vote.
The chair recognizes the senator from Scott, Senator Herman.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've had a lively debate here, and I want to thank both sides for engaging in it. I heard discussion about our patriotic duty and how we should live up to our obligations. I hope that's true, since for the last 3 years we've kind of put a cap on the education appropriation, and after budgets were certified on April 15th, you went ahead and cut them in May. With that being said, this subject we actually voted for in House File 45. We voted for it again in Senate File 209. And I'd ask my body, or I'd ask this caucus, or even everyone in here, to rise against this bill for one reason. You're diluting the actual negotiations that are going on Senate File 209. The real issue here is the sides won't come to the same meeting. No, wait, Mr. President. The real issue here is you won't schedule a meeting. We've actually voted in favor of this twice. The sides refuse to actually meet and have an honest conversation about how we're going to move forward on Senate File 209. So what we're actually doing is we're pulling out some of those pieces to dilute that negotiation. We've been for you twice. We've stuck with you. Now go back to the table. Come up with a piece where both chambers can actually work together instead of shoving stuff through on the side and saying, hey, we were there for you before, we weren't against you before we took it out of House File 45, but we were always with you before we had the intention of not actually following through with our obligations. The whole discussion makes no rational sense. Sit down at the same table, discuss Senate File 209, come up with a way that we can actually move out of this legislative session instead of doing it this way. That's the real issue, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from Butler, Senator Dix.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, just wanted to make sure that I made myself clear from my point of view. It's not that we don't want to fund this and pay our bills. The bills need to be paid. But the decision was made last year to underfund this specific appropriation by 50%. It didn't even come close to meeting the estimate. And so the logical thing to do at this point, if we truly believe we want to be fiscally responsible, is that you fund it with the revenues from the 2011 budget that were from last year's December estimate. Continuing to go beyond those estimates, and some would argue, in fact I've heard it argued already this year, that we should adjust our revenue estimate from the March estimate that we're about to hear. All that does is add up more spending. Spending that I might, by the way, add that last year was added to substantially because of one-time money that doesn't even exist today. So, in order to maintain good, sound budgeting, we need to take the money from the year that it's in. Taking money from another year and spending it in a previous year is how we got into the fiscal mess that we're in. I would advocate that the money should come from the budget that was approved last year from the December estimate. That's how this should be funded. Thank you, Mr. President.
The chair recognizes the senator from Worth, Senator Bartz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the body, the senator from Story, Senator Quirmbach, is 100% correct. The indigent funding was correctly packaged in Senate File 209, which every member of this body voted for. It was correctly packaged in Senate File 209. The only hope that I have is that in this body today, that the media doesn't bow down to the attempted inculcation that somehow this is now the new way that it has to be packaged. It was correctly packaged then, it's still correctly packaged today, and to remove it and to pass it in a singular form circumvents and usurps the process that we were sent here to do. And that is, when the House and the Senate disagree on particular issues, that those are resolved in conference committee. So I'd urge the members of this body to support the process and tell our folks on both sides of the aisle, in both chambers, to get back to the table and negotiate in good faith what they need to do, Mr. President. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, return to the senator from Lynn, Senator Hogg, for final remarks.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. I think a lot of this has been addressed, and there's some history here, and there's inside the Capitol stuff. And I think in the interest of time, I won't rehash that, even though I might like to. But here's the bottom line. There are 988 Iowans out there today with claims of $2 million that the state of Iowa owes them. And even though we passed Senate File 209 unanimously, the House passed it on largely party line basis and has injected highly partisan, speculative future issues into that debate. And that thing is tied up. That's not our fault. The Senate did its job. We passed a bill with unanimous bipartisan support on February 17th in time to avoid this problem where people working for the state of Iowa aren't getting paid. Well, we're now 4 weeks later, 5 weeks later, and they're still not getting paid. So, as has been discussed, I think the time has come for us to get this thing passed ASAP. Save the partisan fights on the partisan issues for later. Let's take care of paying our bills. These are the bills that are now past due. We don't want to sit around and start running up interest charges, jeopardizing the program. Let's pass Senate File 512 and get our job done. And with that, Mr. President, I would ask for the body's support for Senate File 512.
The senator from Lynn moves Senate File 512 be read for the last time, placed on its passage. Those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion prevails. The Secretary will read.
The Senate File 512 by Committee on Appropriations, a bill for an act making supplemental appropriations for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2010 for the State Public Defender, including effective date provisions.
The senator from Lynn moves the reading be considered the last reading of the bill. Those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion prevails. The title agreed to. Title is agreed to. The question now is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor of the passage, Senate File 512 will vote aye. Those opposed vote no. The Secretary will receive your votes.